I begged my husband to forgive me for cheating on him with another man. I never realized how dangerously fragile my marriage was until the night I saw him. James and I lived in quiet harmony, our days a carousel of routines, our evenings a steady rhythm of predictable companionship. Stability was our cornerstone, but it lacked the texture of excitement, the pulse of something alive. And then in a moment everything changed. It was a party, one of those gatherings filled with polite laughter and obligatory small talk. I had been standing near the edge of the room, a glass of wine in hand, watching James engrossed in a discussion about home repairs. That was when he walked in. Travis. The air shifted the moment he entered, a magnetism drawing every eye toward him, including mine. He was younger undoubtedly. The lines of his face were smooth, unmarred by time, his confidence palpable in the way he moved. His smile wasn't just a polite upturn of lips. It was a weapon, disarming and deliberate. I felt it before I understood it. The jolt of something stirring deep inside me, an awakening I hadn't expected, didn't know I needed. Our eyes met briefly across the room, but it was enough. Enough to ignite the smallest ember in a place that had grown cold. His gaze lingered, not long enough to be scandalous, but too long to be innocent. My cheeks warmed, though no one but me could possibly have noticed. I tried to shake it off, to focus on James, on our safe and stable life. But Travis had ignited something, a forgotten thrill. The kind that makes you feel suddenly visible, suddenly alive. Throughout the night, I found my attention pulled toward him, as if drawn by an invisible thread. He moved through the room with effortless charm, his laughter like a melody I couldn't ignore. And then, when I least expected it, he was near me. Not speaking, just standing close enough for the air between us to crackle. I felt the faintest brush of his arm against mine. Unintentional perhaps, but it sent a ripple through me. My breath hitched, and I quickly stepped away, muttering an excuse to no one in particular. In the kitchen, I steadied myself against the counter, trying to suppress the heat rushing through me. This wasn't who I was. But the truth was, I hadn't felt like this in years. I hadn't felt seen. And the way he had looked at me, even briefly, as though I wasn't just another face in a crowd, but someone worth noticing, was intoxicating. Later, as James and I drove home, his voice droning on about something mundane, I stared out the window into the dark. My thoughts weren't with my husband, or the life we'd built. They were back in that room, replaying every stolen glance, every unspoken word, every flicker of something unnameable. That night, I lay in bed, my eyes open in the dark. James slept soundly beside me, his breathing even and predictable. But I was awake, restless, replaying the moment our worlds collided. Something had shifted, and there was no undoing it. It wasn't fate, I told myself, but something far more dangerous. When I saw him again, seated by the window in that crowded cafe, it felt as though the universe was playing a wicked game. I had walked in distracted, my mind clouded by the monotony of errands, only to be jolted by the sight of Travis. He sat with an air of casual elegance, his posture relaxed, one hand draped over his coffee cup. The soft afternoon light danced across his face, illuminating features that seemed too perfect for someone real. I froze for a moment, my breath catching as if my body knew before my mind could process it. This wasn't coincidence. His eyes met mine almost instantly, as though he had sensed me before I even noticed him. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by the slow curve of a smile that seemed to hold secrets I wasn't ready to know. He didn't look away, and I felt the pull once more, magnetic, undeniable. I told myself to leave, to turn around and walk out before this unspoken connection could deepen. But my feet carried me forward, as if guided by some force I didn't understand. My heartbeat quickened with every step, the cafe around me blurring into irrelevance. I slid into the seat across from him, The scrape of the chair loud enough to ground me in reality. My hands trembled slightly as I placed them on the table, clasping them together in a feeble attempt to appear composed. There was no escape now. I could feel his presence. Intense, alive, a silent challenge to the life I had thought was enough. My pulse raced, not from fear, but from the sheer thrill of being near him. He spoke, his voice smooth, low, and deliberate. I answered, my words careful yet betraying the tremor of my emotions. It was small talk, ordinary on the surface, but each sentence carried undercurrents that neither of us dared to address. As the minutes passed, the space between us seemed to shrink. I became acutely aware of every detail, the way his fingers brushed the rim of his coffee cup, the way his gaze lingered just a moment too long, the slight curve of his lips that hinted at something unspoken. I felt the heat rising to my cheeks, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the midday sun streaming through the window. My thoughts were no longer my own. They were consumed by him, by the weight of his attention, by the reckless thrill of feeling desired. When I finally left the cafe, the air outside felt different, sharper, heavier, as though I had crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. I replayed every moment in my mind, each stolen glance and every unspoken promise. I knew I should forget him, let the memory of his smile fade into nothing. But as I walked away, a quiet part of me already longed for the next time our paths would cross. The days that followed blurred together, yet his presence lingered in my thoughts like a phantom I couldn't shake. Everything about my life, its measured pace, its quiet certainty, began to feel hollow, as if something essential was missing. I told myself it was harmless, this pull toward him, these fleeting fantasies that played out in the corners of my mind. They began as innocent musings, the memory of his smile, the sound of his voice. But soon they evolved into something more vivid, more consuming. The way his hand might graze mine if we stood too close. The warmth of his breath as he leaned in to speak a secret meant only for me. And then the messages started. It began simply, a quick exchange over some benign detail from the cafe. A joke, a shared moment of levity. But as the days turned into weeks, the tone shifted. The words became charged, the space between the lines filled with tension I couldn't ignore. Each vibration of my phone sent a thrill coursing through me, a dangerous kind of excitement that made my hands tremble when I read his name. I began looking for reasons to leave the house, errands that suddenly felt urgent, excuses that seemed plausible enough. I was restless, pacing rooms that had once felt comforting but now felt suffocating. It wasn't long before we found ourselves meeting by chance, or what I told myself were chances, in places where we could linger just a little too long. It was during one of those moments late in the day when he suggested a walk. His words were casual, as if the invitation carried no weight. But as we strolled through the park, every step felt deliberate, every silence between us heavy with things unsaid. The air was cool, the fading light casting long shadows across the path. He walked beside me, close enough that his shoulder occasionally brushed mine. Each accidental touch sent a ripple through me, a reminder of just how fragile my self-control had become. When we stopped, it wasn't planned. He turned to face me, his eyes dark and searching, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was no one around, no audience to witness the unspoken conversation passing between us. His hand reached out, hesitating for the briefest moment before it found mine. The world seemed to tilt. My heart thundered, my skin alive with the awareness of him. His fingers were warm, firm yet gentle, as though testing the boundaries of this moment. I felt a rush of heat, a pull so strong it was almost overwhelming. "I can't hold back anymore," he murmured, his voice quiet but filled with intent. The words struck me like lightning, electrifying and terrifying. I should have stepped away, said something to break the spell. But I didn't. I let his words sink into me, knowing I was already far too gone. The evening settled around me like a fragile secret, cloaking the house in stillness. James had called to say he'd be late, his voice distant, distracted by the demands of work. The moment I hung up, I found myself staring at the empty rooms, the air around me too quiet, too expectant. It wasn't long before my fingers trembled their way to my phone, typing out an invitation I couldn't take back. The wait was unbearable, each minute stretched thin by the weight of anticipation. I paced the living room, unable to sit still, my heart beat loud in the quiet. The knock at the door came softer than I expected, but it echoed through me like thunder. When I opened it, there he stood, his presence filling the doorway. The faint scent of rain clung to him, mingling with something warmer, something that made me catch my breath. His eyes found mine and I saw no hesitation there, just certainty, the kind that left me unsteady. I stepped aside to let him in, the simple act feeling monumental. The air between us crackled with an unspoken tension, a quiet storm neither of us could ignore. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly we were alone, truly alone, the world outside fading into irrelevance. We sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between us, the glasses untouched at first. Conversation came in fits and starts, words feeling like placeholders for the electricity that hummed between us. I watched the way his hand rested on his knee, the slow, deliberate movements that betrayed none of the turmoil I felt inside. The first touch wasn't planned. My hand reached out, grazing his in a fleeting, tentative gesture. But even that was enough to send a surge of heat rushing through me, my pulse quickening as I felt his skin beneath mine. He didn't pull away, instead he turned his hand over, letting my fingers settle against his palm. His touch was deliberate, a slow tracing of my knuckles, his thumb brushing softly over my skin. It was a language all its own, unhurried and careful, each movement speaking of restraint and promise. My breath hitched as he leaned closer, the distance between us dissolving inch by inch. When his fingers moved to my cheek, I felt a shiver ripple through me, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his presence. His hand was warm, steady, as though anchoring me to this moment. I closed my eyes, unable to resist the pull, and let myself fall into the space he created for me. Our lips met, not in haste but in slow, deliberate surrender. The kiss was gentle at first, exploring, testing boundaries neither of us seemed willing to admit had already been crossed. But as the seconds stretched on, the tenderness gave way to something deeper, more consuming. In that moment there were no consequences, no shadows of what might come. There was only the fire, burning too bright to be ignored. His lips on mine felt like the answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. The world outside faded, leaving only the heat of his touch and the tension coiled between us, finally unraveling. His kiss was deliberate, a slow unraveling of restraint, as if he wanted to savor every moment of crossing this line. I had forgotten what it felt like to be kissed this way, not out of habit or obligation but with raw intent. His hand slid to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair, holding me in place as though afraid I might pull away. But there was no chance of that. I was rooted to him, my body alive in ways I hadn't thought possible. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his breath mingling with mine, eyes dark and searching. I felt stripped bare under his gaze, seen in a way I hadn't been in years. It wasn't just about desire. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. The air between us felt thick, heavy with promises neither of us could put into words. When his hands moved, they did so with an intentional slowness, tracing the curve of my shoulder, the line of my collarbone, as though committing every detail to memory. I shivered under his touch, not from cold but from the intensity of the moment. Each movement sent waves of heat coursing through me, a slow build that left no part of me untouched. My skin burned where his fingers trailed, a fire ignited by the simplest of gestures. He leaned in again, his lips finding the hollow of my throat, lingering there as though he could hear the frantic beating of my heart. The sensation was overwhelming, a blend of softness and urgency that left me breathless. Time seemed to stretch and bend, each second a quiet explosion of sensation. His hands moved with confidence but never rushed, exploring the spaces that hadn't been touched in so long they felt foreign even to me. The gentle weight of his palm against my waist, the warmth of his breath against my skin, it was all-consuming, leaving no room for thought or doubt. Every moment was deliberate, a symphony of sensations that built with exquisite tension. My own hands moved almost without thought, following the lines of his arms, his chest, feeling the strength beneath his skin. The warmth of him, the solidity of him was intoxicating. When our eyes met again, there was no hesitation left. No room for anything but the intensity of what we'd ignited. His gaze was a quiet storm, pulling me further into the whirlwind we'd created. I felt unmoored and grounded all at once, every part of me tuned to the electric hum of his presence. There was no return from this moment, no way to undo what had begun. But as his touch deepened, his lips finding mine once more, I knew I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I felt completely devastatingly alive. The days after that night were a blur, colored by the lingering heat of his touch and the echo of his whispered breaths against my skin. The intensity of what had unfolded between us seemed to bleed into every corner of my life, leaving a mark I couldn't erase. I moved through my routine as though in a trance, my body present but my mind far away, replaying every stolen moment. Each time I closed my eyes, I could feel the warmth of his hands, the deliberate way he explored, the way he made me feel awake for the first time in years. But with the thrill came an undertow of unease, a gnawing awareness that the ground beneath me was cracking. James noticed, of course. How could he not? The subtle shifts in my demeanor were as obvious as a sudden change in the weather. I became hyper-aware of my phone, guarding it as if it held my very soul. I jumped at every sound, every vibration, afraid it might expose the truth. I told myself I could keep the two worlds separate, that the life I shared with James could continue uninterrupted. But the facade began to strain under the weight of my duplicity. At dinner, I found it harder to meet his eyes, harder still to ignore the quiet suspicion that crept into his voice when he asked how my day had been. It wasn't just the guilt that haunted me, it was the longing. The hours between seeing Travis stretched endlessly, each moment filled with a restless ache I didn't know how to quiet. I found excuses to text him, just to feel the jolt of excitement when his name lit up my screen. But even those stolen interactions came with their own risks. James glanced at my phone more often, his brow furrowing slightly when he caught me smiling at something unseen. I began deleting messages as soon as they arrived, afraid of leaving any trace, yet each time my fingers hovered over the delete button, I felt a pang of regret. The balance was unsustainable, the tightrope I walked stretched impossibly thin. I started to notice how James watched me, not with anger, but with a quiet confusion, as if trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't even know existed. I told myself it was only a matter of time before I regained control, before I could untangle myself from this web I had spun. But the truth was I didn't want to. The pull toward Travis was too strong, the hunger for the way he made me feel too consuming. Yet the cracks were spreading, widening with every passing day. I could feel the storm brewing, its weight pressing against my chest. The inevitability of it terrified me. But beneath the fear, there was still that reckless thrill, the kind that drowned out reason and whispered, just a little further. I knew the fall was coming, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The unraveling began in silence, subtle and slow, like a cracking glass spreading until the whole structure shattered. I didn't see it coming, not fully, though the signs were all there: James's lingering stares, his cautious questions, the way his voice grew heavier with something he couldn't yet name. I had always underestimated James. His quiet demeanor made him easy to overlook, a man who took comfort in routine and the steady flow of ordinary days. But beneath that calm surface was a sharpness, a deep intuition that I had foolishly dismissed. He noticed the changes in me, the shifts in my tone, the way I clung too tightly to my phone or drifted too far away in my thoughts. The confrontation came suddenly, the moment I feared but had convinced myself would never arrive. It was late evening, the house cloaked in the soft hum of appliances and distant traffic. James's voice, steady but strained, broke the quiet. He had found the messages. The realization hit me before he even spoke, his expression, hollowed and disbelieving, striking like a blow. I froze, my breath caught somewhere between panic and shame, as he held up the evidence. My words stared back at me from the screen, undeniable in their intimacy, damning in their honesty. I could barely breathe under the weight of his gaze. The room felt too small, the walls pressing inward as he demanded an answer I couldn't give. His face was a mix of hurt and anger, but it was the pain in his eyes that undid me. It was raw and unguarded, a wound laid bare for me to see. My voice was a whisper, trembling with the effort to explain what couldn't be justified. The words spilled out in a disjointed mess. Excuses, half-truths, desperate attempts to soften the blow. But there was no softening this. No way to lessen the enormity of my betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening, his expression unreadable now, his jaw tight with restraint. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but unyielding, cutting through the air with finality. He didn't need to raise it to convey the devastation behind it. I had never felt smaller, more exposed than I did in that moment. Every word I tried to offer felt hollow. Every plea met with a wall I couldn't climb. I reached for him instinctively, but he stepped back, the distance between us growing in more ways than one. James left the room, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing in my ears. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling, the weight of what I had done settling over me like a shroud. I wanted to cry, to scream, to undo the damage I had wrought. But the truth was unchangeable, my actions irreversible. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and now the world I had so carefully constructed was crumbling around me. There was no turning back now. I spent the night in a haze, the weight of James's absence settling over me like an oppressive fog. He didn't return to our bedroom, didn't offer the solace of another confrontation or even his anger. The silence was worse than anything he could have said. It was a void that swallowed me whole. I replayed the moment endlessly, my mind clawing at every detail, searching for some way to rewrite it. But the truth was immovable. I had betrayed him, not just in action but in the quiet unraveling of the trust that had once bound us. No excuse could erase what I'd done, and the realization hollowed me out. By morning I was desperate, the ache in my chest too heavy to carry. I found him in the living room, his suitcase open but untouched. He sat on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands, the picture of a man unraveling. The sight broke something in me. I dropped to my knees in front of him, grasping for the words that might reach him, but my voice was weak, trembling with the weight of guilt and fear. My apologies tumbled out, raw and unpolished, my hands reaching for his as if touching him could bridge the canyon I had created. He didn't look at me, his shoulders rigid under the weight of my pleas. I begged for forgiveness, for another chance, for time to prove that what I had done didn't define what we were. My voice cracked under the strain of my desperation, but his silence was impenetrable. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, almost too soft to hear, but every word carried the weight of finality. He couldn't forgive me, he said. The trust was gone, and with it the foundation of everything we'd built. I clung to his words, searching for cracks, for any sign that he might change his mind. But his face was set, his eyes distant, as though the man I had known had already left, and only the shell remained. The suitcase began to fill with his things, his movements mechanical, devoid of emotion. I watched, paralyzed, as he dismantled the life we had shared piece by piece, his hands folding away memories as though they meant nothing. I wanted to stop him, to grab the suitcase and throw it across the room, to shout until my voice was raw. But I couldn't move, trapped by the enormity of what I had lost. As he zipped the bag closed, his gaze finally met mine. There was no anger left, only a quiet sorrow that cut deeper than rage ever could. "I loved you," he said simply, his voice steady but heavy with finality. "But you destroyed everything." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with an echo that seemed to reverberate through every corner of the house. I sank to the floor, my tears silent, my chest hollow. I had asked for forgiveness, but some things can never be undone. The silence in the house after James left was unbearable, a suffocating emptiness that seemed to amplify the sound of my own breath and the hollow thud of my heart. His absence wasn't just physical. It was an erasure of his presence from every corner of our life. The coat he always left on the rack was gone, the scent of his cologne no longer lingered in the air, and the bed felt like an endless expanse of cold space without him. I wandered the rooms aimlessly, my fingers trailing over furniture and walls as if seeking some tether to a life that no longer existed. The photographs on the mantel mocked me, their frozen smiles a cruel reminder of what I had shattered. I wanted to pull them down, smash the frames against the floor, but I couldn't summon the energy. It felt like a punishment to leave them there, staring back at me, accusing in their stillness. Every sound reminded me of him. The creak of the floorboards he used to cross on his way to the kitchen, the hum of the coffee machine he always forgot to turn off. I sat at the table where we had shared countless meals, staring at the empty chair he used to fill, and felt the weight of my loneliness press down like a stone. I replayed his words over and over, the finality of them cutting deeper each time. "You destroyed everything." They echoed in my mind, a mantra of guilt that followed me from room to room, refusing to let me escape. At night, the house felt like a tomb. The darkness stretched endlessly, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing in circles. Memories of James intertwined with flashes of Travis, his touch, his voice, the fire he had ignited within me. But now even those memories felt tainted, their heat dulled by the cold reality of what they had cost me. I checked my phone obsessively, half expecting a message from James telling me he had changed his mind, that he was willing to try. But there was nothing. No texts, no calls. Just silence. I thought about reaching out to Travis, seeking solace in the distraction he once provided, but the idea felt hollow. He had drifted away as quickly as he had appeared. His presence now just another reminder of my mistakes. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the slow passage of time. The walls of the house seemed to close in, oppressive in their familiarity. I tried to fill the void, cleaning, rearranging, anything to create a sense of purpose. But it was futile. The emptiness was relentless, seeping into everything I touched. I had thought losing James would hurt, but I hadn't anticipated the quiet devastation of it. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was the absence of who I had been with him, the woman who had believed in a future that was now nothing but ash. The days turned into weeks, and the sharp edges of my grief dulled into something quieter but no less heavy. The house became a shell, a place that once held warmth but now felt haunted. Not by ghosts but by memories, moments that played on an endless loop, their joy now tinged with unbearable loss. I wandered through it like a stranger, each room a reminder of the life I had destroyed. The kitchen still smelled faintly of James's favorite coffee, though the pot hadn't been used in weeks. His chair at the dining table remained tucked neatly in place, but I couldn't bring myself to sit in mine. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows felt like an accusation, a spotlight on the wreckage of what I had once called happiness. I thought often of Travis, though his presence had faded into a dreamlike haze, a chapter of recklessness that I couldn't fully reconcile with the woman I had been before. What had drawn me to him now seemed so distant, so foreign, and yet in my darkest moments, I found myself longing for the way he had made me feel, desired, alive, invincible. But even that longing felt empty now, tarnished by the price I had paid for it. Travis hadn't reached out, and I hadn't sought him. There was nothing left to say. His allure had been fleeting, a spark that had burned brightly but without substance. I couldn't blame him for disappearing. He had only been part of my undoing, not the cause. The evenings were the worst. The quiet stretched long and unbroken, and I found myself dreading the approach of night. I took to sitting by the window, staring out into the street, hoping for something. What I couldn't say. Redemption? Closure? Forgiveness? None of it felt within reach. The loneliness was oppressive, but it came with clarity. I saw myself as I truly was. Selfish, careless, consumed by a hunger I hadn't understood until it was too late. The woman who had smiled at Travis across the cafe, who had invited him into her home, felt like a stranger now. I despised her, but I couldn't erase her. She was me as much as the woman James had loved. I tried to busy myself to reclaim pieces of the life I'd shattered. I ventured out to the store, visited friends who didn't know the full extent of what had happened. Their polite questions about James. How's he doing? Were daggers I couldn't avoid.
Elite, dodged, deflected.
But in those moments I understood the weight of my choices. I had made the decision to cross a line, believing I could manage the consequences, and now I was left with the fallout. There was no going back, no undoing the damage. The house remained my prison, its walls closing in tighter with each passing day. I couldn't leave, but I also couldn't stay, not in the way that mattered. What I had once called home was now nothing more than a monument to my mistakes. Thank you for being with me until the end. Like and subscribe to Nasty Talks.